So welcome to our webinar on cyber insurance. For everyone's information, this webinar is being recorded. If you have any objections or issues with that, you can feel free to just join. But we won't be sharing any critical data or anything of that nature, and so you should be okay there. We're definitely happy to see you here today. My name's Chris Landers. I'm a solutions engineer here at Mavenspire. And with me today, we have a special guest from one of our esteemed partners, DataStream, Marvin Cigaroa, who is the Senior Director of Insurance at DataStream. Auburn Day is also with us. She's also with DataStream. And so in today's webinar presentation, basically we're going to go through and give some education on cyber insurance. Marvin will be doing a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to that piece of it. So I'm kind of your MC for the day, if you will. And then towards the end, as we wrap things up, I'll kick back in around some cyber risk assessment offerings from Mavenspire, and we can kind of go from there. Throughout this, we like to keep our webinars very interactive. If you have any questions, please feel free to either add a question in the chat and we can respond that way, or if you'd like us to unmute your mic to ask questions in real time, we can absolutely facilitate that as well. Just let us know over chat and we're happy to unmute you. With that, I will go ahead and kick it over to Marvin, and I'll be controlling the slides. Marvin, just kind of give me the cue as you need me to flip to the next slide, but I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. Really appreciate it, and appreciate everyone joining here and taking some time to learn a little bit about cyber insurance. I'm going to try to keep this to, about half an hour or so, maybe a bit under that, and we'll also kind of save some time if anyone has additional questions. We can do a little Q&A, but I also encourage to, feel free to pop in the chat there, ask any questions. Chris can hopefully relay those over to me, and also pause throughout the presentation to, see if anyone has any questions. But thanks again. So as Chris said, I'm the Senior Director of Insurance here at DataStream. I've got almost 25 years in the insurance industry, a lot of that spent within the professional lines of insurance, which also encompasses, cyber insurance. It's been an interesting ride, I think, for cyber insurance in general. It's a product that's been around for 20 to 25 years, but really has taken off here in the last 5 to 10 years with an increased in cyber exposure. So Chris, if you want to, go on to the next one, we'll kind of kick this off here. So really just wanted to start here with a higher level overview of where we are with cyber risk today. I think in any kind of most reports that we're seeing that are coming out, cyber risk, if it's not the number one concern for most company executives at this point, it's definitely the number two. We're seeing the cyber risk being the number one or two concern, ahead of things like, economic uncertainty, natural disasters, physical business interruption. It's something that what it tells me is that more and more folks are aware of the cyber risk out there and the need to try to mitigate that exposure in some ways. The concerns, I think, revolve around a lot of the things that we're hearing, perhaps in the media. That stuff that includes security breaches, network hacks, glitches in the network, different ransomware events. And we can certainly talk a little bit more about those type of cyber attacks and how they're covered by a cyber insurance policy. But it's really, I think, that media attention that's driving the increased attention on cyber and realizing that it's a big concern, especially in the last 5 years here. But my concern, my side of the table here is that a lot of companies, especially on the small to mid-size level, are going without cyber insurance. So that's definitely something that we're here to help with, here to try to educate people and let them know that there are solutions out there. The remote workforce has certainly had an impact on the increases in cyber claims. It's companies that are still trying to learn how to deal with working in a remote world, and it's just also with your lack of oversight over those employees, just more access points where bad actors can attack. So remote workforce has certainly had an impact on the cyber exposure these days. Some other things that are kind of driving it, I think, are again revolving around media exposure of ransomware and funds transfer fraud. These are kind of some of the big ones. You may have heard also of things like social engineering. We've got another slide later on where we can certainly talk a little bit more about ransomware and social engineering. And again, the average cost here of a cyber attack, continues to rise. You can certainly go online, and I think you're going to find all different types of amounts, average losses. I think the key here is that no matter what data you're looking at, no matter what report you're looking at, what we're seeing is that these cyber losses tend to result in losses in the six figures, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's really what we're seeing. And again, when we're talking about small to mid-sized businesses, we do feel that that's a material impact. And again, really want to kind of come from the point of educating them that there is a product and a solution out there to try to help out with these sort of things. And finally, there's a heightened regulatory environment out there. There's a lot of privacy regulations. Most of these are done on a state by state basis, right? Folks may have heard, just I think as they do in a lot of things, California leads with a lot of regulations, and you have a very strict California Consumer Privacy Act. But we're seeing a lot of these pop up across the country, whether it's Massachusetts, Colorado, Connecticut, Utah, Virginia. All these states have their own privacy laws. And with that, you get notification requirements. There are fines that come along with that. And then we're also seeing these type of privacy regulations on a federal level, whether it's the FTC, HIPAA regulations, child's online privacy, and on an international level. If there's anybody out there that, again, we're living in a global world. Perhaps you are a retailer, perhaps you're selling a product in Europe. We have GDPR there, which is a very strict privacy regulation there as well. So these are, I think, are the things that are driving the need for cyber these days, and goes back to the number one bullet point here, which is cyber becoming a major concern for most companies. Yeah, Chris, if you can go on to the next one. So we get to kind of the meat of what cyber is there for. It covers a wide variety of type of cyber events, but really one of the primary reasons that we have cyber is for data breaches and privacy breaches, right? Someone goes in, hacks your system, an employee takes unauthorized use of your data, and it results in not only losses out of your own pocket for IT forensics and different things that you have to do with that. It creates liability from possible suits from those folks whose data was breached, and it also creates a notification responsibility. But what we see is, we talk to different clients, and some clients believe that they don't have any data. And what I would say with that is to take a good second look, because I believe that all companies these days have data that they're storing. And really, what we're looking at here is what the industry calls personally identifiable information, right? Really, and what that means is any data set or any set of information that can uniquely identify an individual. And that can be as simple as a name and an address, right? A person's full name and an address. So we could be talking about a customer information. If you've got a name, an address, a birthday, it also applies to employee information. If you've got employee data and that information is breached, if that information is leaked, those privacy laws also apply to employee data. It's not something that they're exempt from. If you're in the healthcare space, we're obviously dealing with personal health information here, which can which kind of sees increased scrutiny, can also see fines related to HIPAA. Obviously, credit card transaction, I think, is one that we see. Financial accounts is another. One that's not on here, but we're seeing a lot more frequency on it, is the data that's stored in your email, whether it's Outlook, Gmail, or any other type of program. You've got to kind of think about what type of sensitive, privileged data you have in those emails, and what would happen and what type of notification would result as a result of your email being compromised. and data there being compromised. You've got to think about PDF attachments, reports, all those type of things that we share via email. And the another one I'd like to highlight here as well is this dependence on third-party IT software providers. Another thing we hear a lot as well. I don't have a network. I don't store any data. Everything is in some cloud service, some SaaS, right? Software as a service. The thing there is that it's a couple of things. And one is that you are ultimately responsible for the data of your clients. You can certainly look to those cloud providers, those SaaS providers, in order to try to recover some losses that you may suffer. But ultimately, you're responsible for your customers for protecting that data, whether that's you storing it or whether that's stored in some third-party cloud provider. And the other thing too, this doesn't require only your cloud provider to have some sort of data breach. You and your employees have login credentials into those software where that information is stored. All it takes really is one employee to have their login credentials compromised. And you've got to think, what happens if a bad actor gets access to the login credentials? Are they now available to access all of that information that you store in the cloud? So those are the things that we think about. Again, it's something that I like to highlight because it's something that we do hear a lot in terms of our clients maybe not realizing the importance of the data that they're storing. So what I would say with this is to kind of think about where your important data is stored. Go through that exercise of trying to think where your important data is stored. Think about who has access to that, and how do you ensure that that information is being used or accessed properly.
Yeah.
Those are kind of the key points that I would have around here. Yep.
I think the one you brought up around email is a great example. I know a Fortune 100 company that recently changed their policies with regards to employees' ability to back up their own PST files, back up their email on their local machines, because you had employees that had been there decades that had PST files from years ago. And it's to your point on, just think about all the different back and forth conversations that you're having over emails internally with customers, vendors, etc. And it's you think about a security posture there where there's a lot of companies that are starting to centralize their policy around that, remove the ability for individual users to back up their email to PST files, and putting policies in place, retention policies in place, where it's okay, if it's important enough for you to save, you need to justify it, etc. And this is the way it gets done, not in a PST file on your local machine. So I thought that was a great example. I just wanted to highlight.
Yeah, no, that's exactly
Yeah.
right, Chris. And the other thing too that's important to keep in mind is that this data and the exposure that it creates with privacy is not only the hacking concern, right? Someone hacking into your system and doing it. Obviously, that is a big exposure. That's not the only way that this data or private information can kind of get out there. You can accidentally post personally identifiable information on a website. That's happened quite a bit, where there's a glitch in the system, that information is publicly posted. You can accidentally send it to unauthorized individuals, right? You hit the wrong thing on an email, you send a report to someone that shouldn't have had it. It's got all that customer data on there. Another one is just simply lost or stolen electronic data. If you have someone's laptop, that's compromised, and they are able to get in there, you've got to think, are they able to then access all of this private information? And what does that mean for me from a notification perspective, right? Again, we've got these laws around notification, around privacy, that say that you have to notify individuals if there's actual or potential access to their information. So here it's almost a situation where you have to say, well, we had somebody's laptop stolen. Is there now potential access to this private information? And do we have to legally notify all of the individuals that may have been affected by this? And the other one, unfortunately, is that employees present a very big risk in terms of rogue employees, right? Have passwords, have access to all this information. It goes back in terms of best practices and what type of employees do you give, what type of access do you give to your employees, and think about Do I need all my employees to have access to everything? And the answer usually they don't. So, perhaps start thinking about those type of things in terms of, different levels of access for different employees, because that certainly presents a big area of threat. So, yeah, next one, Chris. So this one here is, this one I think is self-explanatory. It's just a lot of numbers that we run across that I'm sure you're seeing, whether you're watching the news, picking up magazines or papers. I think the key here, and again back to kind of my first slide there, was we're seeing an increase in these numbers. We're seeing these numbers be six figures. There's certainly larger numbers that get into the millions, and that's certainly the case. But what I want to kind of emphasize is, even if this is a six-figure loss, for a lot of small to mid-sized businesses, that's a material amount, right? Whether it's 100, 200, $300,000, that's a material impact, and that's where we're seeing the average for a lot of these type of claims. And what we're trying to help with here is this first one on the top left, is that 60% of these small business victims are out of business within 6 months after they suffer a cyber breach. And I think the reason is obvious. It's the amount of that loss they're just not able to withstand that. They're not able to withstand that from a financial perspective. And obviously, there is a product out there, right? We're talking cyber insurance here. Cyber insurance is designed to cover exactly these type of exposures, and it's a form of transferring your risk to another party, right? You transfer that cyber risk in exchange for the premium over to a cyber provider who's going to hopefully help you with these type of expenses. So it's again, it's kind of that insurance they talk about. It helps you sleep at night, because what we're seeing also that's not on here is that we're seeing almost 50% or higher of small to mid-sized businesses get hit with cyber attacks. Oh, I'm sorry, there is they're about 43%, but yeah, we're seeing that closer to 50% in terms of getting hit. And that's another thing that we hear quite a bit from clients is like, hey, I'm a small guy, no one's going to target me. And that may be true. You may not be targeted, but Chris may be able to speak to us as well. What we're seeing is there are definitely different levels of cyber bad actors out there, folks that want to hack into your system, do some bad things to your network. You certainly have the more sophisticated groups, really big groups are going, whale hunting. We're going after the big enterprises. But then you have a whole other group of folks that are just specialists in what we call almost like drive-by, in cyber attacks. What they're doing is they are running very simple external scans, on a bulk basis, looking for people that have vulnerabilities and going after low-hanging fruit. They're not looking for big payouts. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, add to that, some of these bad actors are compiling an inventory of targets and then going and selling that information on the dark web. And so it might not be that what they pulled they're specifically going to use. They're going to go now sell that vulnerability to a more capable bad actor that can go and actually monetize it.
That's exactly right. I mean, what we're seeing are there are folks that specialize in nothing but initially getting into the system. That's all they specialize. All they want to do is get into your system. Once they're in your system, as Chris says, they bring somebody else aboard and they just get paid a commission essentially for being able to do that. And they hand it off to someone else who can do a lot more damage once they have a compromised system. So, yep. Next slide, Chris. So with this, right? So we're talking about what these cyber exposures are out there, and then again, we deal with a lot of clients on a daily basis. We have a lot of conversations. I think another one that comes as a result of this conversation is clients may be thinking that these exposures, that these risks that they face, are covered elsewhere, and I think it's important to understand that you're likely not being covered for cyber exposures on your other package policies, right? Whether that's your general liability, your property, your crime policies. The intent of those policies these days, especially, is not to cover cyber related events. Specifically, what we're seeing to make sure that they are clear about this is that they are actually specifically adding cyber exclusions to those policies. You know, you can take a look at those. I think there's been a lot of uncertainty. There's been a lot of vagueness over the last 5 to 10 years in terms of what the intent is. A lot of these things have gone to court as clients have challenged the insurance companies. And as a result of that, I think the insurance companies now are saying, look, we want to be clear about what our intent is. Our intent is that we're not looking to cover cyber exposures. And we believe that those cyber exposures should be covered under a separate cyber policy. So we're seeing a lot more of that happening. We also hear our clients tell us that they already have cyber coverage because they have, some sort of rider or endorsement onto their existing package policy. I have seen instances where that does provide coverage, but unfortunately, I think in the large majority of cases, what we're seeing is that cyber coverage that they're obtaining on, again, as an endorsement or a rider on their BOP is very inadequate, is what I would call it. We'll get into the breadth of cyber coverage a little bit later, but what we find with these endorsements is that they typically only cover data breach and privacy events, right? So they're not covering other items like ransomware, cyber crime, other first-party expenses that occur that would have to come out of your own pocket. It covers liability only, right? So this would mean, again, suits or claims that are made against you, but it doesn't cover costs like IT forensics, public relations, business interruption, the notification costs, right? Those are not third-party exposures. Those are costs that come out of your own pocket. They're not liabilities that you face to another. And so these endorsements we've seen are very inadequate. And then finally, the key there is typically see those with very low limits of 25 to 100,000 is where we see that, especially when you're looking at a $25,000, $50,000 retention. You start adding up all the costs that come with this: notification costs, credit monitoring, IT forensics. All these costs start adding up, and 25 to 100,000 from what we've seen. And if again you keep in mind what the average losses are, we feel is very inadequate in terms of those limits there. Cyber standalone policies usually begin at $1 million limit, just to have a reference here. I think on the lower end, I'd feel comfortable recommending 500,000 if cost considerations is a concern. If you feel you are on the smaller end, really 500,000 is kind of where I would feel is the minimum. Most of our clients start with a $1 million limit of liability on their policies. And then finally, we hear a lot again with the cloud providers, right? I don't store any of this data. It's all, some sort of software provider. That's where I store it, whether it's Salesforce, some cloud storage, accounting software, whatever the case is. I know these days we work with so much with these third-party cloud software providers. The problem here is that if there's an issue, right? If these cloud providers have an issue with some sort of data breach, they're going to be liable to all of their clients, not just you, which means that everybody has to get in line to try to recover their losses from that provider. That provider can go bankrupt. That provider could have other issues with their insurance policy, where their insurance policy doesn't carry the high enough limits to cover everyone's exposure. But I think more importantly, what we're seeing here more and more is that these software providers are looking to limit their liability by contractual means, right? If you read your contracts with this, they're looking to limit their liability of what they would end up paying you, your recourse, in the event that there's some sort of data breach with your data. And that liability that they're capping it is likely not going to be the liability that your clients are going to be comfortable with, which again, you are on the hook to your clients. You can look to these third-party providers for some compensation, but ultimately you're responsible to your clients in terms of suits and claims that you would get from them. So that's something else that I think is important to highlight here. I'll pause real quick. I mean, we've got a few more slides here, but definitely pause. Feel free to jump in the chat, or if there's any questions here.
Yeah, if anybody raises their hand and would like to ask verbally, I can unmute your mic. But also feel free to throw a question in the chat, and we'll stop to answer the question.
All right. Yeah.
Nothing so far.
Sounds good. So this, we've kind of highlighted all the different things that are going, all the things at work. I think as senior executives, I think the business owners, these are the type of things that they should be thinking about when it comes to cyber insurance or cyber exposures. Their decision of whether or not to, go ahead and protect themselves with a cyber insurance policy is, if you don't have a cyber insurance policy, what would you do in the event of a claim, and could your company, financially withstand that? Again, what we're looking at is, something of roughly half of small to mid-sized businesses are getting hit with claims. We're seeing that those claims are easily in the six figures. So that's obviously I think really more of a financial decision to figure out if that's something that you'd like to transfer, right? I mean, insurance at the end of the day is a risk transfer mechanism where you transfer that risk to a third party in exchange for the premium. But the other important one here that I think is key is, who would you call, right? In the event that you're hit with a ransomware attack or some other virus on your system, as you're scrambling to get your system back on, who are you calling on that? And with a cyber insurance policy, obviously you've got a first line of communications, which is the claims team at that company, who's at the very least going to help you walk through it, has experience on it, and is going to, again, kind of do some hand holding there throughout the process. We talked about the number of businesses that are going out of business as a result of cyber losses, and that's what a lot of this looks to kind of touch on. But yeah, Chris, ready for the next one? Okay, so understanding cyber insurance, right? So what really does cyber insurance cover? That's obviously the other question that we hear a lot. This is all great, but how is a cyber insurance policy going to help me? So the intent of cyber insurance is to protect you from a few different types of attacks, or I guess events that can happen to you, right? Those are what people think of as hacking attacks, security breaches, right? That's when you have these bad actors come into your system, install malware, viruses, Trojan horses, all these type of things that they literally come in and hack your system. We talked about the fact that there could be a variety of ways to have a data breach, privacy breach. That's not only a hacking, but that could be employees, that could be accidental disclosure. Those are the type of things that would be covered under a cyber policy. You've also got ransomware and extortion. This is something that's been in the news quite a bit the last few years. What we're seeing, it's not impacting only large companies, but smaller companies as well. They will, technically the way it works is they'll come in, lock up your system, and immediately ask for some ransom payment in order to release that data to you. That could be as low as 50, 100, $200,000 on the lower end. Of course, in the media, you've probably have heard of kind of some of the larger ones, which is Colonial Pipeline paid $44 million in a ransom payment a couple of years ago to have their network released. You had JBS Foods, which is a huge meat producer. They paid an $11 million ransom a couple of years ago as well. So those are the big numbers, and obviously at the lower end, small to mid-sized businesses, we don't expect them to pay anywhere near that. But again, we talked about those numbers and what type of financial hit could your company withstand in these type of situations. So the cyber policy offers both first party and third party liability. That's again an important piece to keep in mind, because we feel that those endorsements or riders on a BOP policy are not as broad. So third party liability, again, are claims that are made against you, typically by your clients, when their data or other private information is breached, right? And what they are going to allege is they're going to allege some sort of financial loss that they suffered as a result of your negligence. So as a result of your negligence in not protecting their data, it could lead to those third-party liability claims. Third-party liability can also be regulatory fines. We talked about all the different privacy regulations on a state-by-state level, on a federal level. If you get hit with regulatory fines, that's also considered a third-party liability. And those regulatory fines, for the most part, would be covered by a cyber insurance policy. And I say for the most part, there are certain laws, certain fines that are just uninsurable. They're legally uninsurable. In those cases, the thinking is, hey, we're trying to penalize the insured for doing something. And if the insurance company is allowed to reimburse them, then they're not suffering the penalty. But for the most part, the intent is for those regulatory fines to be covered by a cyber insurance policy. Your first party expenses is everything else. Everything else that comes out of your pocket in the event of a cyber claim. So those are things like IT forensics, public relations management, credit monitoring that typically is offered in the case of a privacy breach, all the notification expenses that you would have to incur, the law firms that come along with trying to help you navigate the notification across federal levels, across state by state, any ransom payment, any losses that you suffered from financial fraud, whether that's fraudulent fund transfer, social engineering. Those are the type of things that the cyber policies are there to cover. These days, they are very broad. They are very comprehensive. We can certainly get into more details on an individual basis. This is something that I think it could be important to go line by line. That would take a lot longer than a half an hour webinar here. But again, I just want to highlight that there is a difference between the limited endorsements that we're sometimes seeing on bot policies versus what's available in the market today with a very comprehensive, cyber insurance policy. So the yeah, that's kind of I think hit all the points on this slide.
Yeah, all great points. I think it's a good call out, because at Mavenspire, we obviously have a lot of customers who come to us when our as a service offerings around security, data backup and recovery, as recovery being the big critical piece of that, but are always sure to bring, again, all the information that you just presented back on. Okay, great, we've got a great DR plan in place. If a bad actor gets in, we've got fully tested DR strategy. We can have you back up and running in X amount of hours, 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever that may be. But again, going back to third-party liabilities, it's like, it can't just be this. Great, we got you back up and running, but that doesn't, some companies might look at a good backup and recovery strategy as an alternate to having a good cyber insurance policy. And the truth is, you need both, because even if you're quickly recoverable and remediate and all that stuff happens very quickly, that doesn't take away the fact that your systems were penetrated, exposed, and you have third-party liability risk.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
So here is got a few claims examples. I think a lot of this is self-explanatory, so certainly don't want to spend too much on this. The key here, I mean, this first one here is a data privacy exposure, right? What happens if your information is breached, and it kind of highlights a claim scenario. Another point that kind of made earlier, but I want to reemphasize here is we hear a lot about the large, high profile events. What we don't hear a lot about, and what we don't have actual claim examples for the most part, are on the smaller to mid-sized businesses. Most of these cyber attacks, most of these cyber events remain private information, right? It's not information that the companies themselves want released. It's not information that that's really being disclosed out there. It's stuff that is happening. But again, we've got to keep in mind that you may say, hey, I'm not really hearing about, these small companies being hit. And the reason is that information is really being kept private, as it should be, really not out there for the public domain. So this is one here where, again, dealing with a third party provider, dealing with a cloud service, information was available publicly. We talked about that. It doesn't always have to be a hack, and kind of a hypothetical situation here in terms of how it will work and the type of savings and the type of benefit you get from a cyber policy. So Next one, Chris, please. And ransomware. You know, we talked a little bit about ransomware. This is one of the top 2 or 3 leading claim kind of losses, you know, leading claim that we've seen over the last few years. And what that means is really started in about 2020. So 2020, right? COVID hit. That's when we really started to see a significant uptick in ransomware events and ransomware claims. I think a lot of that has to do with folks working a lot more remote. As we talked about, there's a lot of more access points, a lot of more endpoints, as they say in the cybersecurity industry, to try to compromise devices, try to gain access to networks, whether those are your own or third party, and really led to an increase in ransomware. And unfortunately, where is now like we talked about earlier, a criminal enterprise, a criminal business that has its own hierarchy in terms of way it works. And anyone from, you know, small to mid-sized businesses to large enterprises are certainly susceptible to these type of claims. The other thing to keep in mind with ransomware is that the payments for ransomware are typically made, or I would say almost always made, in cryptocurrency, right? So when you're dealing with a ransomware event and you have the help of a cyber insurance company there to help you through this, they are going to assign a cyber ransomware negotiator. These are really individuals who do nothing but specialize. They know who the bad actors are. They may have negotiated with them previously. So you're going to have these negotiators helping you out throughout the process. There's the whole issue of the cryptocurrency conversion. And with this, there's you know, kind of something I would like to highlight is a lot of these carriers are actually making the payment, the ransom payment on your behalf, which I think is a much easier path, especially when we're talking about crypto, when we're talking about coming up with $100,000 to $200,000 in a very short amount of time. There are other carriers that actually cover this on a reimbursement basis, meaning that those funds have to come out of your pocket first, and then they will reimburse you for the cost. It's better than nothing, right? To be able to at least recoup those funds. But you know, obviously, we prefer situations where the carriers will make that ransom payment on your behalf. Just kind of the nature of this. It's usually very urgent. It's a cryptocurrency. Obviously, a lot better when the cyber insurance company can make that payment on your behalf. So, next one, please, Chris.
Got it.
And this is the last one on the claim example. And this is social engineering. Again, along with ransomware, these are probably the top 2 leading reasons for claims over the last few years. Social engineering, also known as phishing type schemes, are very prevalent. This is essentially, social engineering essentially means when employees at your company are tricked into do something, right? They've been manipulated in some way, usually by spoofed, phished emails. And usually the way it works is exactly what you kind of see here, is they get an email that, you know, seems to come from some sort of executive at the company. There is some sort of urgent payment that needs to be made. That executive is going to be nowhere to be found for the next few hours, but that employee needs to make that payment as soon as possible. The employee not realizing that this is actually coming from some bad actor and not that executive goes ahead and makes that wire payment. That, of course, that wire payment was not made to the intended recipient. It is off to some bad actor, some offshore account, and that money is now gone. Again, unfortunately, this is a very prevalent type of loss that we're seeing right now. This is something that is covered by most cyber policies up to about a $250,000 limit. I think that speaks to how prevalent these type of suits are. At this point, cyber carriers are not willing to provide the full $1 million limits, but we do feel that the $250,000 sublimit on these type of claims do go a long ways towards helping recover from them. If you do have a cyber policy in place, this is certainly something that I would take a look at to see if you have the sort of coverage, and also to take a look at your limit to see what sort of limit you have on this one. Next one, please, Chris. So with this, I think I've got a couple of slides here. Yeah, so just want to talk a little bit about some best practices, what you can do not only to make yourself less of a target, not only to try to avoid some of these claims, but also when it comes to trying to obtain cyber insurance, because these are some not only, again, not only best practices for yourself, but also some of the things that insurance companies are looking for you to have, things that make a better risk, things that are going to, you're going to be able to get a quote and hopefully get a quote at a better premium, right? So these are the kind of the key points that I want to highlight. And the first one is having multi-factor authentication, also known as, two-factor authentication, dual-factor authentication. And what ideally the insurance companies want you to do is to have multi-factor authentication on your email access, on your remote access, and any sort of like privileged admin accounts, is what they're looking to do. So it's really become almost a base requirement for clients to have this. We can, in some cases, obtain cyber insurance without it, but it does make the process a lot more difficult. Insurance companies see this as a basic requirement to have this days. And that goes back to the compromising of credentials and how easy it is then to get into your networks, get into your systems, steal data, lock up your systems, all from the fact of not having more better login credentials. And that goes along with the second point here, and that's password management, right? Just having a process, a procedure in place to frequently update your passwords, and also the strength of those passwords. Obviously not having repeated passwords, all those type of best practices, password management systems. And again, those two first points go to having, better credentials in order to try to avoid some of the hacking activities that we're seeing. Backup activity, that's another one that's key. In the event that you are hacked, in the event that your system goes down, are you able to recover? Are you able to recover within a short amount of time? And that's going to depend if you have those backups that are offline, and or on a cloud. The more ways you have your data backed up, the better. And the key here is you want to make sure that it is separated completely from your own network, and not contaminate that data there. Endpoint detection and response, definitely something that we're seeing a little bit more and more. I expect in the next several years that's going to become more of a hot button issue with cyber insurance carriers. This is kind of just takes that antivirus, kind of a little further, right? It not just only monitors your kind of perimeter there, but it actively is searching throughout your entire system, and alerting you, and sometimes responding on its own to threats that your network may be facing from outside parties. And the final one here is employee cyber risk awareness. And I think with employee cyber risk awareness, the main ones there are especially to do training around those phishing scams, around those social engineering scams, around password management. Really talk to your employees about the importance of that, in order to hopefully avoid some of the losses that we talked about today. Next one, Chris. Thanks. So that was it for the the cyber kind of piece. Definitely wanted to give you a brief overview. I did go over a little bit here, so I'm going to keep this quick. But here at DataStream Cyber Insurance, we're a retail broker. We focus on nothing but cyber insurance. I think that is the key. We know that for the most part, you're probably dealing with your local broker, your local agent out there. We have no doubt that they're doing a great job on the general liability, the work comp, your health benefits, auto, all those types of things. But we are seeing that a lot of the local guys out there just don't feel comfortable dealing with cyber. Don't have the expertise to really understand what they're doing in cyber. And so we come from a position where that's all we focus on is cyber insurance. We've got access to tons of markets. We try to make the process as easy for you with a online application process, and are happy to follow up that with phone calls, Zoom calls, anything we can do to, again, dig into some of more of these issues that we talked about, help you understand the coverages, and get you a quote at the most reasonable price. So appreciate your time. happy to take any questions, and just really appreciate Mavenspire here giving us the time to help you educate you a little bit on cyber insurance.
No, we appreciate you as well. This has been great. I guess if there are any questions, just a quick raise of hand or an add into the chat. If not, I will close this out. I just had a couple more slides I wanted to get through, very much related to the topic. Don't see any hands raised or any chats coming through. So obviously, in relation to everything that Marvin was just talking about and educating you all on, when you think about whether you have an existing policy or if you're getting into the market for a new policy, there's how is the insurance company going to look at your company and evaluate your company, right? When they look at your cybersecurity score, right? It's just like any other insurance. They're assessing, it's a risk assessment of, how much is it going to cost them, and determining how much, that they're going to charge you on your rates. And so, if you relate it to, a credit score, for example, you go to get a new loan. If your credit score high is poor, meaning you're going to be a higher risk, you're going to get a higher interest rate. So it's kind of the same thing when they look at this. And so one of the things that we offer here at Mavenspire is a cyber risk assessment. This gives you, or allows us to give you, a lot of insight into how you would be viewed, not only publicly. Like, there's a lot of tools out there in the market right now that can kind of give you a quick analysis of some risk that it sees while hitting your organization externally. But our cyber risk assessment, which handles that piece of it, but additionally looks inside internal and does an internal evaluation of the environment to basically look at what is that internal risk. If you think back to some of the points Marvin was making earlier in the webinar around, we talked about email security a little bit, and just some of the different things that end users, employees, et cetera, the risk that they can bring into an environment with what they're doing on that endpoint device, and how locked down and secure is that endpoint device. We basically do a bidirectional scan within the environment, where we can see what is the once somebody gets in, what is that attack surface look like internally, where we have risk, going back to things like passwords. An example of that would be people that are using the same password across multiple tools, or using very basic, non-complex passwords that basically make them easier to crack. But again, going back to the example of somebody using the same password across, so let's say 5 internal tools, that means if their password gets cracked, the bad actor now has access to 5 tools instead of 1, right? Things like cached credentials, right? You have administrators in the environment. Bad actor gets into an endpoint device, and maybe the day before, somebody with admin access was responding to a trouble support ticket, logged into that machine. Credentials are cached. At the same time, bad actor gets in, and now they have unilateral access to use those cached credentials to now navigate across your internal infrastructure into your data center. So it's evaluating and identifying that type of a risk. And after these scans are run, we at Mavenspire then come back and present the results back to you to basically give you, obviously, a full assessment. What is your risk externally? What is your risk internally? With obviously a very detailed list of things that you're doing well, that came out green. Think of it as like a green, yellow, red, and obviously with a big focus on the things that are red, that are saying, hey, these are not only major security gaps that might cost you more on your cyber policy, but also you need to remediate these things because you're truly at risk of being hacked. Just flipping to the next slide, we offer this in a couple of different ways. You can see, obviously, on the left-hand side of this graph below, there's 2 user quadrants, so 1 to 15 user version, and then a 15 users plus version, and then we do an essential premium and premium plus. So If you want more information on this, absolutely reach out to us. We can do a more deep dive one-on-one with you to go into the details of the differences between these different editions. But basically, you can do these. We can do these as a one-time engagement. We can also do these as a monthly ongoing engagement where we come back and do these assessments periodically. And so you can kind of see, as you go along, as you remediate, how much better did your security posture get? And then, our normal offerings around secure and recovery, which just have to do with, again, mitigating that risk and then being in a recoverable state. But with that, like I said, I invite anyone to, if you did have any questions that you held to the end, now would be the time to raise your hand. If you would like to reach us out to us individually, if you have questions for Marvin and his team, we can pull them in and absolutely get a one-on-one session set up. If you want to talk with us here at Mavenspire around the cyber risk assessment or any of our secure and recovery options as a service, happy to do that as well. As always, we do post a recording of this webinar on our YouTube page. So give us a couple of days to do any editing we want to do. We might have chatted a little bit at the beginning of the recording that we might want to shave off, but after we do a little editing, we'll post this on that, and you'll see a link come out to that in our next newsletter when we send that out, probably by next week. With that, again, I'll throw out one last invitation for any questions or comments that anyone wants to make. Happy to unmute your mic or respond to a text in the chat. Okay, I think we're all set. Thank you very much for attending today, Marvin. Again, thank you to you and Auburn and all of the help. We definitely appreciate the partnership and look forward to helping anybody that needs our help going forward.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you.